All right, so let's talk a little bit about where we come from in this whole course and this whole process. Really, we're starting with the scientific method, and as such, we're focusing on observable, empirical, measurable evidence. If you look at one of the videos there, Scientific Method Made Easy, certainly a focus on evidence. And I do want to talk for a minute about evidence versus proof. We don't talk about the concept of proof in science much because you don't know from one set of observations that the next observation won't be different. So there's the concept of inductive research looking at swans. If all of them that we see are white, the first swan we see is white, the next one we see is white, the next one we see is white, we start to build a theory that says, well, all swans are white. But it's entirely possible that somewhere there's a black one. We just don't know because we haven't measured all of them. But we do have a preponderance of evidence that say swans are white, right? So we start to look for observable, empirical, measurable evidence that leads to a broader theory, a broader construct. Now, we don't know that we can't say that it's proved or proven or proof, but we have good evidence, right? We're building towards evidence. And because we're building towards evidence and we can't say that there's proof, there is a requirement of replication. So we develop theories based on repeating things over and over again so that they can be verified and we can get a stronger sense that, okay, while it's still a theory, because we can't prove it, we have numerous replications that tell us it's pretty strong. It explains most or all of the situations where we test it, or sometimes they don't. Sometimes theories just explain, under certain circumstances, a phenomena. So we start to sharpen through replication where we can say a theory is applicable or not. The fundamental goal of science through the scientific method is to understand, predict, and control. Now, there's not a hierarchy there, so sometimes we can control things without understanding them. One example of that is when not Paxil, Prozac came out. It is what's called the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. They knew that it worked. They knew that it worked on serotonin, but they didn't know exactly which pathways it worked on in the brain. So we were able to actually control depression, reduce it, make people's lives better, but we didn't thoroughly understand it. And if you've known anyone who's ever been on an antidepressant of that nature, you'll know that sometimes they try 2 or 3 of them because they are what the title says, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And you got to try until you find the one that works best for that person. So this is not a hierarchy, but all phases of that work, and all phases of that are beneficial. Understanding is beneficial, predicting is beneficial, controlling is beneficial. One last thought on control. This is not a negative connotation on control. It's, how do we do something that helps people? And if we can control depression, alleviate the symptoms, make them feel better, that's one of our goals and one of our aims. It's to improve the situation of others in the social sciences, right? So, research questions. There are kind of 2 broad categories within social research, 2 kinds of questions that we ask. The first one is, what's going on? Is there descriptive research? How do we understand what's happening? And that is kind of the beginnings of starting to build the theory and starting to figure out what it is that we're researching, what we're looking at. Second one is explanatory, which is why is it happening? And so you'll see those kind of both tie together to the concept of understanding, predicting, controlling, right? Understanding, probably more descriptive. Understanding is more descriptive, and controlling comes from the more explanatory sides of research. But most of what we do, and you'll see it in the methods as we roll these out, really fall into those 2 broad blocks of, are we just trying to understand and describe what's going on? Or are we really trying to say, well, why does that happen? What is the causal effect from A to B? Characteristics of research. We got a few here, and I'm not necessarily going to read through all of them, but I do want to kind of say that even when you're doing applied research, it contributes to theory development, even if that theory is rather small and short-lived. So if I think about some of the work that I've done for clients, what we're trying to do is get a theory for the client. So had a client that had a new president come in, and the president said, I really want to know what are the concerns, what's going on in my organization. Okay, we didn't have a theory to start with. So we had to try and build up to, here's what we see is going on, and if we could, here's why things are happening. So we did a series of focus groups, asked people, what are the things that were working well, what are the things that weren't working well, and tried to build a mini theory for what makes things work in this organization. So even if we're doing applied research, we're still kind of building a theory or a construct or a concept of what's working and why it's working or not working. Other things about research, it is always based on empirical data. Already said that, but it's worth repeating because we're looking for objective observations. I'll get in a couple of minutes, I'll talk about ways of knowing things. There are other ways of knowing things, but really if we look at the data, it gives us a foundation upon which we can all agree. It is objective, it is outside ourselves. Even if it was collected by an individual and you say, well, it's a case study or descriptive research, it's still empirical because there's an observation there, and we can then pull the observation apart from different perspectives and try and figure out what it means. So is there some opinion in it? Sure. Is there a little bit of subjectivity? Sure. But we'll talk about some methods where even in those situations we can turn that kind of information into empirical data. Always we're building on previous research because we're adding to the knowledge that's there. And if you fail to look at the previous research, well, it's kind of foolish on your part, and it makes a lot more work for you. Because where there is information out there, you can learn from others' mistakes. You can learn from others' successes. You can learn what has been done in the past that has and hasn't worked. And certainly to ignore the previous research is foolhardy at best, and generally something that will leave you with a lot more work to do. So we're absolutely building on what's already there. So that necessitates the need for lit reviews and understanding how things have been approached and measured in the past. Objectivity, I kind of already talked about under empirical, and we try to minimize our biases. If we can't eliminate our biases, because we are human, and in a lot of the research we do in applied settings, we're part of the process. Rather than eliminating the biases, all of them, we always have some, let's put them out there and talk about them and say, here are my biases. And so now those who consume or read the research are then able to decide whether or not they can accept our findings or not. So we do a couple of things around objectivity. Data's one, and then certainly being fair, not fudging or manipulating the data is another, or even manipulating the method, which is far more insidious than just fudging the data sometimes, because it's harder to find out. It looks good, but it's not. And we don't do that. And we also then, if we do have biases, we put them on the table, right? Here's my approach. Here's my bias. Here's where I come from, so that those that are consuming or using the information we give can account for it. And like I said in the overview, we want to be good skeptics, and we want to understand that others are going to be good skeptics. So let's give them the information they need to make that choice. Let's see, other things. Allowing for generalizations, certainly in primary research we're trying to expand and talk about broad generalizations, but even in applied research I would like to be able to, for that client I mentioned where we did the focus groups, I'd like to be able to generalize that to next year, right? I'd generalize to a new time frame. I don't necessarily want to generalize to a different organization because they're not the same, but I want to give in this case it was the president, some things that she could work on that were applicable not just for one moment in time, but were generalizable to a broader time sequence. And so even in applied research, we want to make sure that we're thinking about how do we generalize this beyond this moment in time, or this particular sample, or this particular place. Last one, good research, reliable and valid. I will talk about that this week in just a little while, so I'm going to leave that alone for the moment.